Hello, class. Welcome to the spring quarter 2023 at International University of the East. This class is BMN 650, Buddhism and Christianity. So you'll be receiving these lectures every Monday, starting today, April the 3rd. There may be one, we'll go over the schedule, but there may be one holiday, but otherwise you'll receive the lessons, um, the lectures online every Monday from the school, and you will need to respond to the attendance assignment to get attendance credits each week. So that's how this works, since this is an online class. Let's go over the syllabus. Go ahead and open that. First of all, let me uh, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Benjamin Starkey. Feel free to call me Ben. I've been teaching at this school for almost 1 year, since summer of 2022. And I've also taught at Horizon University for about 8 years, and I've worked full-time at the office there for 4 years. So I know some of you may have been at Horizon, or some of you may even go to Horizon in the future. There seems to be quite a bit of students coming back and forth. So maybe some of you know me from the other school where I teach. Um, so I grew up in the state of Alabama, southeast United States, and I attended college in Nashville, Tennessee at Belmont University, where I studied religion. Then I moved to California to attend a school called Fuller Theological Seminary. I'm in Pasadena, where I lived for many years, and I earned two master's degrees, one in theology, the Master of Divinity, and then one in intercultural studies, MA ICS. So that's a little about me. I am a Christian, so I focus more on the Christian theology courses that are taught at the school. And this course compares Buddhism and Christianity, but I do that more from a Christian perspective. As you'll see, we'll get into that. The first time I've taught a course like this. Uh, so hopefully you enjoy this course. I know, or I'm sure you're all from different national or ethnic and also religious backgrounds. Maybe some of you are Christians, maybe some of you are Buddhists, maybe some of you are other religions or even no religion, but hopefully you can learn from this course. But I want to be upfront and admit that I do teach from a Christian perspective. However, I do want to be as respectful as possible in my coverage of Buddhism. So that is one of the goals of this course. Now, if this were an in-person course, I would like to take the time to get to know each of you, but unfortunately, we cannot do this. So hopefully, through your emails, I'll get to know you a little better. Um, but let's move on, and we'll cover the syllabus now. So again, this is BMN 650, Buddhism and Christianity, which is spring 2023 online class. This course examines the teachings and practices of Buddhism in comparison with the teachings and practices of Christianity. Focus will be given to essential similarities and differences between the two traditions, Christian perspectives on Buddhism, and the practice of Buddhist and Christian inter-religious dialogue. So again, the class is more of a Christian perspective on Buddhism, and not as much a Buddhist perspective on Christianity. Uh, so the course will probably cover more of Buddhism than Christianity, but there will be at least some coverage of both. All right, so that's what we're doing. And maybe in the future, someone will develop a companion course that covers more of Christianity from a Buddhist perspective. That would be possibly a good follow-up to this course. Preferably would be taught by a Buddhist professor and not myself, although I do want to keep learning. Uh, as much as I can about Buddhism and things in that regard. So the course objectives. Upon completion of this course, each student will be able to summarize the key teachings and practices of Buddhism and Christianity, analyze the similarities and differences between Buddhism and Christianity, consider and critique insights offered by each faith, explain and evaluate Christian perspectives on Buddhism, apply principles of interreligious dialogue within conversations with people of different faiths. So hopefully you can learn to do that regardless of your own faith background and even apply it to people of faiths besides Buddhism or Christianity, uh, possibly Jewish or Muslim or Hindu. Those are some of the other major religions. Okay, so instruction will consist of lectures, reading assignments, class discussions, and handouts. Classroom questions and discussions are strongly encouraged. Of course, we would do that in person if we were meeting in person, but you can always ask questions by email. And I'll just skim through this. Not all of this is as relevant to our online class, but each class will have a lecture on the assigned chapters, except for weeks 5 and 10, or lessons 5 and 10, which are the midterm and final exam. There will be 8 lectures, and then the 2 weeks for the midterm and the final, for a total of 10 weeks. So you're expected to read the material. I know not all of you are going to bother to get or read the textbooks, but I will cover the important points in my lectures from the books, at least the important points that I'm going to emphasize and test you on during the tests. And if we were again meeting in person, we might be able to do group work, but since we're online, that's not an option, so that's not relevant for this class. All right, let me show you the required textbooks. The first is called Jesus and Buddha, Friends in Conversation. I have the book here, but it doesn't really show up because I'm using a virtual background. This is by authors Paul Knitter and Roger Haidt, Orbis Books. And the second is Buddhism, A Christian Exploration and Appraisal. The authors are Keith Gendel and Harold Netland from IVP Academic. And I've given you sort of a recommended reading or additional resource, Christianity and World Religions, An Introduction to the World's Major Faiths by Derek Cooper. However, as I'm developing this course material, I may actually use material from other books as well that I have not listed here. I found one that I found very helpful so far called Fragrant Rivers of Wisdom, An Invitation to Buddhist Christian Dialogue by A. Christian Van Gorder. So today's lecture is going to come more from this book, actually. I found this to be even more helpful than the book by Knitter and Haidt that I had planned to use. So I will be using that one at least for the day, maybe for the first few weeks. But I do always recommend reading the books. You will learn much more that way. All right, let's go down to my contact information. This is my email address and phone number. You'll be submitting your assignments to me by email. Feel free to contact me by email if you have questions or anything else, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. It may take me a few days. I am very busy, and I do have other jobs as well. So, but I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. And you can call me if you need to. But again, I'm very busy, and it may take me some days. I may just not have a chance to get back to you. It may take a few days. So keep that in mind. But I do check the messages regularly, and will respond to you as soon as I can. All right. These are all the course policies. These are fairly standard for the school. Hopefully you're familiar with those. Let's go down to the projects and assignments. First is weekly attendance assignments, which are 20% of the grade. These are announced in class each lecture and are due at the beginning of class on the specified due date. So ideally, that means in this case, you should be emailing your assignments to me by Monday of next week for each week. No late work will be accepted. Um, and in this case, for the online class, you don't need to print the assignments. You will just, for the online instructional sessions, you'll just email them to the instructor by the following class session. Next is the um, paper, which is 20% of the grade. Choose one of the course topics, such as an important teaching or practice, and how the teaching or practice is similar or different in each tradition, Buddhist and Christian. Do additional research on the topic and write a short paper, which is 5 to 7 pages, to summarize what you've learned and argue a position about your findings. Paper should include at least 5 references and use a recognized citation and reference style. I'm most familiar with Kate Turabian's A Manual for Writers of Term Papers, Theses, and Dissertations, which I think is in the 9th edition now, but there are other styles. The Chicago style is related but a little different, uses uh, parenthetical references instead of footnotes. There's also the APA style and the MLA style. Those are the ones I'm familiar with, at least, but I'm most familiar with Kate Turabian. So I'll give you a sample of that in a few weeks so you have some idea of how to use that. The papers due the final week of class, Friday of the final week, same time as the final exam. And again, it should be submitted by email. So covering all the academic standards and totaling up the grade, we see attendance and weekly assignments. Our weekly homework is 20% of the grade. The midterm is 30%. The final is 30%. And then the paper or presentation is a paper this time, not a presentation, because we are meeting online, and it's also 20%. That totals 100%. And I do give some extra credits for the weekly assignments as well as for the uh, on the tests. So I give you plenty of chance to get a good grade. Uh, so of course, here's the grade breakdown. 90 to 100% is in the A range, 80 to 89 is the B range, 70 to 79 is the C range, 60 to 69 is the D range, and less than 60% is an F. So keep that in mind. And then here is our schedule. This week's our introduction. And I've given you for each week, I've given you the date and the chapters of the textbook. And each week, again, we'll have an assignment that I give. And then the assignment is due the following week. So here you see the days, the readings for each week, and the assignments. So week 5 is May the 1st, which is our midterm exam. And then keep in mind, there is a holiday, May 29th, the Memorial Day holiday. And then our final exam will be on June the 12th. So, all right. So keep this syllabus in mind. I'm not sure if the school emails you the syllabus. If you want a copy of it, feel free to ask. Or if you ever want a copy of the lecture notes, feel free to ask in the email and I will send those to you. But let's move on now to the lecture for the week. Okay, so Buddhism and Christianity, lecture 1. All right. And this again is taken from not from what I had anticipated or assigned as the main reading, but from the other book I picked up because I found it to be more helpful. That's Fragrant Rivers of Wisdom by Christian Van Gorder. And we're starting with chapter 1, which is called Wrestling the Crocodiles. It's a metaphor. This is not literal crocodiles like the crocodile hunter. but a metaphor for the dangers and excitement of interfaith dialogue. All right. So the author's purpose in writing this book is to share a few insights from a Christian perspective, uh, shared in warm friendship with Buddhist practitioners. Van Gorder states that any book exploring Buddhist Christian relations can be compared to wrestling with crocodiles. It is dangerous and may lead to being eaten alive. However, interfaith dialogue is also exciting. You never know what might happen next. He further compares the assertions of arrogant religious practitioners to quicksand that sabotages respectful interfaith relations by promoting polarizing, isolating identities framed in exclusionary language. The very choice to identify with any religion is inherently an act of exclusion, given that religion is a form of life that is comprehensive and of central importance. Van Gorder argues that there is no benefit from continuing to strive in religious competition. While an insecure devotee may shout that they alone know where truth resides, they cannot also prove claims that the faiths of others are deficient. For those with open hearts and a willingness to learn with a fresh, open mind, it becomes obvious that the faiths of others are able to provide deep foundations for personal authenticity and strong commitments for relational warmth. Encouraging paths of mutual respect among people of different faiths would seem to be of obvious benefit. However, some religious practitioners call on the faithful in their own tradition to be careful about becoming polluted by the differences of others. Such guardians of truth speak assertively because they are unable or unwilling to fathom any new ideas beyond their own boundaries. They prefer entrenchment to exploration and feel isolation defends correct religious views or orthodoxy. All that matters to them is the question of who has the only truth. Those with such religious certainty feel they have no need to ask questions because they have already captured the truth. They feel they have all the answers and no questions, with no need to learn about the wisdom of others except as means of defending their own faith and criticizing the faith of others. They assume they are right and everybody else is wrong. Uh, okay. However, with such However, such self-reporting guardians of our communities have no authority in the larger worlds of religious dialogue. Those who aspire to have open hearts can encourage genuine interfaith engagements as refreshing encounters in an environment that is often polarized. There is need for cross-traditional studies that find shared conversational spaces with others of goodwill. So this is introducing our the concept of interfaith dialogue and how we need to engage respectfully with those of different faiths. In this case, this is written especially for Christians engaging with Buddhists and how we can engage respectfully with them and be willing to learn from them. So that's what we're doing in the beginning of the class, the first few weeks, trying to learn what we can about Buddhism and respectfully, and learn to engage respectfully with Buddhists. Towards the end of the class, last few weeks, we will um, take a stronger Christian perspective and maybe make more of a case for Christianity as for its uniqueness maybe even his preference, um, and possibly critique Buddhism to some extent. Hopefully, or the goal is uh, to be fair and balanced and respectful, even in that process. Even if we do still, those of us that are Christians, especially, still find that Christianity is preferable, or we may even see to what extent it's possible to be both a Buddhist and a Christian, if that is possible, or fully, or at least to some extent. Uh, we'll consider that, but some may still say ultimately we need to be committed to Christianity, those of us that are Christians, and we can learn things about Buddhism, but we still see things that we cannot agree with, or things we don't think are quite right. And so we do find Christianity to have a stronger case in that sense. Um, so those are things that we'll turn to later on, but our attitude overall to begin with is one of respect and trying to learn from Buddhism. So that's what we're the foundation that we're laying in this first lesson. Let's look at religious isolationists. Religious isolationists find refuge and comfort in their rigid ideology. Buddha taught that the world was imprisoned by such dogmas and ideologies. Self assertive ideologies objectify adherents of other faiths and force them into preconceived expectations. Religious authorities who rarely know someone from another faith prefer performances instead of open ended and genuine responses of its relational trust. Self proclaimed religious leaders claim they alone hold the truths about the true God. They ask us to take their word on this, even though there is no empirical proof beyond their assertions. They have set up a God of their own conception, and they have a need to dismiss the views of others. Such assertions make the appeal for creative engagement even more urgent. The global reputation of our traditions as contexts of healing embrace or inclusion demands such engagement. We must abandon religious stubbornness for a higher path of love. Non-relational arrogance is sad, coming from a Christian perspective, which begins as a missionary faith committed to engaging each person on their own terms and preconditions. This same relational priority at the beginning of faith explains why Buddhism is also a religion of missionaries. Followers of the Buddha and the Christ, or Jesus, uh, opens or embraces others or includes others in a spirit of healing openness, not defensive alienation. Our first task is to share. All right. Let's turn to tasting strawberries, another metaphor. People of goodwill should seek spiritual freedom, creativity, appropriate humility, and exploration. We should be learners confident in meeting the other on their own terms and without prejudgments. We can embrace whatever is true, honorable, and just wherever its source without fear. So even if we think that our religion is the ultimate truth, or ultimately what is correct, there are still truths we can learn from others, uh, regardless of what other maybe from different religions or wherever they come from. When Buddha and Jesus began to teach, there were no such things as Buddhists or Christians. Instead, early followers aspired to become inner beings who embodied the values they preached. The call of Buddhists and Christians can be compared to hardworking vendors at a farmer's market who encourage others to sample the sweetness they have to offer. Once a shopper savors fresh strawberries, they can then reach their own conclusions. Instead of rigid ideologies, we should live out our truths with mind, emotions, and action. And that's in contrast to intellectual trash compactors. Is the goal of meeting those of other faiths the promotion of tolerance? Real tolerance means loving others from a sincere heart that moves us beyond mere acceptance to engage with others and mutual respect. Invariably, those involved in interfaith interactions will continue any number of misunderstandings. Between Buddhists and Christians, problems arise when adherents from one group expect the other faith to be an unchanging tradition that they have read about or hear mentioned or heard mentioned. But no spiritual community is static or unchanging. While it is fine to read books that summarize another's faith, it makes more sense to learn about the changing experiences of those practitioners who aspire to live faithful to their convictions. So I encourage all of you to engage with people of other faiths. Those of you that are Christians, engage with Buddhists. Those of you that are Buddhists, engage with Christians. And those of you maybe with no religion, engage with Buddhists and Christians or whoever, whatever other people of religion of other religions you can find. Be willing to engage with them, learn from them. In this class, we will be using more books, um, especially since it's an online class. We have to have the more objective standard we can get from books, and that's the best we can do. But if we met in person, maybe there would be more chance to invite people of different faiths to share with us as well, and that would be more ideal. Now, in religious studies, a term used to describe the empathetic process of learning about the experiences of others is phenomenology. Notice that's in bold. That's an important term to be sure you learn. It'll probably be on the test. So the goal of the phenomenologist of religion is to gain, as far as possible, a participant's appreciation of the faith. What sometimes happens instead is that people try to sort the experiences of others into tidy categories, leading to a focus on matters of less importance that are easily dismissed. Critics of other religions often present an inaccurate and distorted view of the faith they are critiquing. The minds of the closed minded are trash compactors who take everything and compress it into something they can throw away. They frame in a negative light the experiences of others using the concepts of their own traditions. The ideas of others are most easily attacked when not understood. This is the fallacy of making a straw man argument, which, unlike a real man, can be easily knocked down. So, in other words, the opposing view is mischaracterized in order to be easily refuted. Religions deemed false are simplistically caricatured in contrast with one's own religion, which is deemed the truth, the absolute truth. The smug assume that others who think differently have nothing to offer, and so they are incapable of meeting others without presumption. All right, let's turn to inventing Buddhism. How old is Buddhism? According to one view, the first European missionaries invented the term Buddhism to describe those who followed the teachings of the Buddha. Of course, they were around much longer before that. The early Western conception of Buddhism was devised as a rhetorical event by Europeans who were eager to encapsulate and thus dismiss what they did not understand. Again, making a straw man. This claim provides an instructive starting point for interfaith conversations. Uh, that it was Westerners or Europeans' desire to systematize these different groups as being Buddhists when they were maybe more different to begin with, and they weren't quite what the Europeans thought they were. Since the first interactions between Buddhists and Christians, numerous themes have been debated. In fact, both the static Buddhism and the categorical Christianity are quite distinct from the lived experience of everyday adherents. The Buddhist faith is primarily an experience of helping people live lives with balance. The conviction of otherness and the distance between Buddhists and Christians seems firmly established even before adherents meet. Yet, one who lives inside Buddhist or Christian communities might find it impossible to tell them apart until teachings are articulated. There is plenty of room to build links that articulate mutual questions and explore our common ground. Let's turn to fresh thinking. Perhaps interfaith engagements best begin not with words, but in sharing spaces of prayerful, meditative silence. One scholar claimed it was the mission of the Christian church to share a sustaining life breath. For Christians, mission means witness to Christ expressed in both words and silence. For Buddhists, a mission also means witness to Buddha both in words and actions. After living for several years among Buddhists in Yunnan and Singapore, Ben Gorder gained a profound respect for Buddhism and practice and a willingness to share the joys of his own Christian faith as he grew more interested in learning more about their perspectives. Both faiths originally flourished in contexts where there was already a set religious path. Both have often dealt with the religious other or outsider through searching for common ground rather than relying on initial assumptions of incompatibility. Neither began with absolute declarations of a dogmatic assertion, though this is contested by some Christians. Christ's message was experienced before it was written. The vitality of the early church was personal and relational before it developed definitive creeds to be applied universally. Christian theology was launched as a local means of mission and relationship before being used as an agent for argumentation, though there were controversies among the first Christians. They had a remarkable degree of unity rooted in love for God and love for one another. One theologian argues that early Christianity did not see itself as radically exclusive, but as the all inclusive religion, embracing all that is true anywhere. And that's the kind of spirit that we want to take in a class like this. Uh, so, a goal of this book and the class is to encourage creative thinking about how Buddhists and Christians can best relate to each other. Another goal is to provide a resource for Christians who want to interact with Buddhists with a greater sense of respect. So, this class is designed especially for Christians in mind, but I know not all of you are Christians. Uh, so, hopefully, you'll be able to apply principles as well. Van Gorder writes as a Christian, hoping to encourage interfaith interactions that help others better grasp some of the theological and relational challenges that Christians among Buddhists often experience. He describes his life's passion as to challenge and be challenged by the ways that the faith meets the faiths, or Christianity meets other religions. Weary with shallow answers and simplistic ideology, he wants to move the North American context out of such superficial assertions. He argues that no religion has a monopoly on wisdom or spirituality, and that interfaith explorations should not be based on the need for theological control for the sake of our own comfort. Our goal, rather, is to listen, learn, and love as our faiths teach. Respectful listening is central to a faithful witness of Christ's Great Commission, which is to make disciples of all nations. Sadly, some Christians have reduced interfaith discussions to another tool for evangelism, which is spreading the Christian message. In contrast, it is the duty of any person of faith to be transparently honest in interpersonal interactions. There is no room for deception. While Christians are called to be witnesses of faith, a call to evangelize should never be expressed as an aggressive tool to belittle others. Being a faithful adherent of a faith includes loving authenticity and relational humility. When we listen to those of other faiths, we also gain the potential to learn more about our own traditions. Asian Buddhists have been interacting with non Asians for centuries. Early American revolutionaries showed a basic familiarity with the teachings of Buddha. During the 19th century, a few Buddhist texts were translated into English and quoted by American authors and the Transcendentalist movement, including Emerson and Thoreau. Still today, Buddhism is sometimes seen as a uniformly Asian faith when in fact it is a global community. Given its diversity of expression, Buddhism can be described as a thousand petaled lotus, a kind of flower that's got 1,000 different petals. So let's turn to next to chapter 2, which is about the thousand petaled lotus of Buddhism. And we'll start with a transformative hope. About 1 billion people worldwide, mostly in Asia, call themselves Buddhists. Individuals throughout Asia and around the globe find comfort, not find, but find comfort in the teachings of Buddha. His message explained both the cause and cure of suffering, as he preached another alternative to the ritual oriented Hinduism of India. Expressions of devotion vary throughout Buddhist communities. For many, the tests of life are dealt with by stopping in the middle of hectic days to bow silently for a moment. The faith continues to adapt to new contexts with fresh ways of expressing ancient teaching. Disparate cultures, Indian, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Indonesian, Tibetan, Southeast Asian, and others, express both Buddha's message and their own unique cultures. But all Buddhists recite three ancient convictions. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the teachings or the Dharma, and I take refuge in the community. Buddhism is the first world religion known to history. Little is known with certainty about Buddha because early accounts of his life were written centuries after he lived. We're going to go over his life later on, but there are a lot of legendary elements that seem very fanciful and possibly fictitious because they're written so much later. 5 centuries before Jesus, when Zoroaster taught in Persia, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle tutored in Greece, prophets preached in Israel, and Master Kung taught in China. At the foothills of the Himalayas, a begging monk named Siddhartha Gautama began to preach. He wrote no books and established no government, and yet he changed history. Just as Christianity was born from Judaism, Buddhism probably sprang from the context of Vedic traditions we now call Hinduism. However, it would be misleading to suggest that Buddha's ideas were primarily a reformation of Hinduism. His teachings presented an entirely new cause and effect scenario in humanity's quest to overcome suffering. How many different types of Buddhist traditions are there? The answer depends on how you frame the question. There are many kinds of Buddhisms which are related to a vast family of religious expressions. There are as many as 84,000 different paths that a Buddhist can follow to achieve enlightenment. It is a pluralistic faith with no central organization, primary text, or agreed upon rituals. The central focus of Buddhism is liberation. Different expressions of Buddhism are ways to share that one refuge of truth in contrasting cultures and periods of time, and these different forms are a clear mark of its success. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.